Hey, welcome to The Explainer. You know, we spend most of our lives trying to figure out what is true. But today, we're going to dig into the how. We're going to explore a pretty radical shift in how we even think about knowledge, and why that old myth of the lone genius just isn't cutting it anymore.
So here's the plan. First, we'll tackle this idea of the lone knower. Then we'll look at some really weird real-world puzzles that kind of break that whole model. And finally, we'll see what the new framework looks like. Basically, we're moving out of the philosopher's armchair and into the modern-day control room.
All right, let's dive into section 1, the lone knower myth. You've heard the phrase a million times, right? Think for yourself. It sounds like the best advice in the world. But what if it's actually dangerously incomplete?
No, seriously, think about it for a second. How do you decide what's true about, say, the economy, or a new scientific discovery, or even a medical diagnosis your doctor gives you? Is it really just you, your own brain, and your own senses all working in a little bubble? Probably not.
For centuries, really, the main picture philosophy had for knowledge was the armchair thinker. You know, this solitary genius sitting alone, just reasoning their way to the truth. But let's be honest, the real world looks a whole lot more like a control room team. Knowledge isn't just one person's light bulb moment. It's built and managed and shared through these huge, complex social systems.
And this wasn't just some fringe idea. As the philosopher Alvin Goldman points out here, this super individualistic view was the absolute bedrock of epistemology. That's the study of knowledge itself. The big problem, though, is that this whole picture of the lone knower completely falls apart as soon as you try to apply it to the real world.
So where exactly does this old model start to crack? Well, it happens when you run into these fascinating real-world puzzles. Situations where it looks like a group knows something that, get this, none of the people in the group know individually. This is where it gets really weird and really cool.
Okay, just read that. It sounds totally contradictory, right? I mean, how on earth can a group decide one thing when every single person in that group believes the exact opposite? This isn't just a brain teaser, it's a real thing that can happen. This is called the doctrinal paradox, and here's a simple version of how it works. Look at the judges. Each one is being perfectly logical. Judge 1 says both premises are true, so the conclusion is true. Judges 2 and 3 each see one false premise, so for them, the conclusion is false. Simple enough. But look what happens if the court votes on each premise separately. The majority says premise 1 is true. The majority also says premise 2 is true. So logically, the group should find the defendant liable. But the majority of the individual judges, 2 out of 3, actually voted that the defendant is not liable. The group's conclusion is the opposite of what most of its members believe.
Now, here's the kicker. This isn't a mistake or a bug in the system. It's a deep, profound feature of how groups think. It shows us that a group can have its own justification, its own knowledge that's completely separate from the beliefs of the people in it. The group itself can know something different.
Puzzles just like that one showed there was a massive blind spot in the old way of thinking. You just can't explain what's going on if you only look at individuals. And that realization forced this huge shift in philosophy, something called the social turn.
And this is what came out of it. Social epistemology. It just asks a totally different kind of question. It stops asking, how do I know something? And starts asking, how good is our legal system at finding the truth? Or, is this particular scientific process a reliable way to create knowledge? See the shift? It's about grading the systems we all rely on, not just our own individual thoughts.
This slide really just lays out the whole transformation perfectly. We zoom out from just looking at one person's mind and start looking at the social systems and practices that generate knowledge. And this isn't just some abstract idea. It changes epistemology from a purely armchair theory into an applied science, a set of tools we can actually use to get better at finding the truth out in the messy, real world. So, what does this new toolkit look like when we actually use it? Let's take it for a spin on one of the biggest, most complicated questions we're facing right now, moving from the courtroom to the potential risks of AI. So think about this. How are we, as a society, supposed to figure out what to believe about the existential risk from AI? This is not something you or I are going to solve from our armchairs. It is a massive, complex social epistemology problem. Yeah, your personal gut feeling about AI risk, it's pretty much worthless here, honestly. An applied approach forces us to think like that control room team. We have to weigh these tiny, tiny probabilities against absolutely colossal stakes. And doing that means we have to rely on a whole network of different experts just to run the numbers.
Okay, so what is this number? It's a way of making an almost unthinkable cost feel a bit more real. It's a tool from applied logic that basically says, look,
even if you think the chance of an AI catastrophe is microscopically small, like 1 in a billion, the potential loss of everything is so enormous that the risk is still worth taking incredibly seriously. It's a structured way of thinking about huge, scary problems where we don't have all the answers.
And that's really the whole point. Dealing with something like AI risk isn't about every one of us becoming an AI expert. It's about evaluating and trying to improve the social systems, the research labs, the governments, the public conversation that we depend on to manage this risk together.
Okay, so we've talked about courtrooms and AI risk, but how does this big idea, moving from the armchair to the control room, actually affect you? Let's bring it all back home.
We hear this all the time, right? Do your own research, but in the world we live in, that's often a trap. You can't be an expert in everything. Trying to do so can just isolate you in an echo chamber. Applied epistemology offers a much more powerful alternative. Think with others. The critical skill for the 21st century isn't knowing it all yourself. It's getting really good at figuring out which experts and which institutions you can actually trust.
So, what's the bottom line for your own life? It's realizing that knowledge is a team sport. It means that thinking critically about the systems you trust, science, the media, the legal system, is just as important as thinking critically about your own beliefs. It's understanding that thinking for yourself doesn't have to mean thinking by yourself, and it's seeing that big problems like misinformation aren't just about individual people being wrong, they're about failures in our social systems.
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? Real intellectual autonomy isn't about cutting yourself off from all outside influence. It's about becoming skilled at consciously choosing which influences to trust. It's about being the smart, capable captain of your own control room team.
And that kind of leaves us with one final big question. In this age of just endless information and disinformation coming at us from all sides, maybe learning how to think with other people is the only real way left to truly think for yourself.